All right, it's 10 o'clock here, 10 o'clock Eastern Time, and want to welcome you to Photoshop 101. This is a little series of webinars we'd like to do for marketing and communications with some basic communication skills in areas of Photoshop and maybe later photography, maybe video, social media. So we're looking at different things that you would be interested in out there and that you can find useful. And so we thought Photoshop would be something that people would want to learn about, because when Rich Maxey did a photography workshop a few years ago before he retired, there was a big push for Photoshop. A lot of people wanted to learn about it. And Rich gave a very, very glossed over presentation on it. So this was something that was in demand, and it was it took a little bit of time to get it together, but we finally have it together. So without further ado, it's 10:01. Once again, I'll remind everyone to keep their mics silent, except for those of you that are presenting. I will turn it over to Sophie Schmidt and Tori Salvador. Sophie and Tori are two of our designers, and they're very, very talented in what they do. And they're going to give you the basic rundown of Photoshop and the very basics of it, and ways that can help you with your communications tools and putting things together at the county level or at the state level. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And with further ado, I will turn it over to Sophie and Tori.
Thank you, Doug. I'm Sophie Schmidt.
I'm Tori Salvador.
And like Doug said, if you have questions as we start to go through, we've got just some basic tips today. We're not sure where your Photoshop expertise may lie, how much experience you might have. So if we are repeating something, we're sorry. But hopefully it'll be a good refresher course for those of you who have used it before, and maybe just a basic introduction for those of you who haven't explored the wonders of Photoshop yet.
These are also some of the things that we use a lot on a daily basis when we are photo editing. So it's what we thought would be helpful.
So if you have a question as we go through, feel free to speak up. And at the end, if you have any specific questions about things maybe we haven't touched on yet, or a specific photo problem that you're having or that you've experienced, then we can address that at the end. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to start screen sharing, and if anyone has an issue, please pop it up in the chat or unmute and let us know. All right, so when you have Photoshop Creative Cloud open, it should look something like this. Your screen may not have the preview thumbnails open if you haven't opened any files previously, but you'll always have this new and open option available. And we're just going to walk through opening a file. You can select from any of your basic, desktop, documents, downloads, locations. We're already in the folder that we need to be, and I'm just going to grab, let's just do this one for starters. So the first thing that we wanted to go through was resizing an image. You may have very different needs for a specific photo, whether it's something that you are going to be using in a print piece, whether it's just a photo itself that you're going to be printing, or whether you're even publishing it on a web page. So resizing it for each of those venues is really important to get the best quality picture for those specific areas. So the first thing that you want to do is look at the actual properties of the image and see how large the image is, if it's already at the size you want, or if you need to change that. So if you look at, don't turn your hotspots on in your computer, because then everything will just disappear like this just did. If you look at image up in the top, you'll have all of these different little menu options. We're going to be looking at image size. And this is going to pull up and show you your overall image size. That's how big the file itself is. It's also going to show you your pixel dimensions and all of your options for changing that or altering it. In this case, we are looking at the pixels per inch. That determines the quality of your photo. So it's actually saying how much, detail is in an inch of your photo. The more pixels per inch, the more detail you're going to have. Standardly speaking, you want at least 300 pixels per inch for a print-worthy photo. If you are going to be printing it, whether that's on a desktop printer or a professional printer, that will give you a photo at really sharp, detailed resolution. If you're doing something for the web, then you're going to want to change that to around 120 pixels. The actual industry standard is 70 dpi or ppi, pixels per inch. But honestly, that looks very grainy on a screen, unless you're viewing it on a phone screen. So I usually tell people that a little higher is better, just to ensure that it still is nice and crisp looking. So 90 to 120 is optimal for web. So to resize in Photoshop, you're going to look at your width, height, and resolution here. And say that we want to save this beautiful dogwood picture for the web. You're going to usually know if you have a specific size in mind. This class is different because we're not actually using this for anything, so we don't know what size it would be. But let's say that we needed a picture that was 400 pixels wide. So we would put 400 in the pixels. Actually, we're going to first change the resolution for 120 for web, and then up here we'll put the pixels at 400. Now you notice that the height and the width, there's this little chain link between them. That means that those are locked. So you don't want to unlock those, because then you're going to get a very skewed image. It's going to look funky. So it'll stretch, and you'll see that's just really funky. So don't do that to your pictures. Keep it locked, and that way it will automatically keep your ratio. So, like I said, setting the resolution to 120 for web. You want to set the width for 400 pixels, and it'll automatically resize the height. Then you click OK. You'll also see that the image size up here changes. It was 11 megabytes. Now it's only 330 kilobytes. That's much more appropriate for web, and we've cut that size substantially. And you'll see that. It'll resize on your screen. If you were doing this for print, let's say, I'm just going to undo what I just did in the sizing so that we can act like we're going to print it. This is not really helpful for print, obviously. Pixels are a web kind of measurement, and you want to know how many inches that's going to be when you print it out. So you can change that to inches. You can change it to centimeters, millimeters, whatever unit of measurement that you need. And you can change this just like you change the pixel sizes. As long as your units are locked, you can change it to 6x4, you can change it to 4x2, and you'll see it resize here. You can also, this will help you see just what the actual quality is going to look like. It's set at 100%. So if you change the pixels, you can see how much smaller that image is going to be and how much you have to zoom in, and it's still going to be fuzzy at that lower resolution. So it's just a helpful little preview. That is really it for resizing. So the numbers that you need to remember are If you are intending an image for print, you want to keep the image size and resolution to at least 300 pixels per inch. You can view those by looking at the image size and check the image. That's the first thing that I do when I receive an image and I know I'm going to be using it for print, is just open it in Photoshop and check the resolution. That's going to let you know if you need to use it at a smaller size because it's not a high resolution image, or if you can use it at a larger size because it is really high resolution. If you're going to use it for web, you need to have at least 72 dpi resolution, but I do recommend upping that and setting it to about 120 pixels per inch if you're going to use it on the web, just for a nice crisp photo. And the next part of this is tied into the resizing, but we're going to talk about cropping, and cropping especially for focusing on the best parts of your image. You may have a good photo, but something about it is a little bit off and you want to focus on the good parts. And so Tori is going to talk about cropping to make the best photo that you possibly can have.
Yep. So for this, I'm going to open a new example image. So let's close our little dogwood there. So cropping is really helpful. It's really helpful, like Sophie said, if there's a part of the image you want to focus on, you want to make it more dynamic and make sure that the thing that you actually want the photo to be of is in the spotlight. And it's also really helpful if your image needs to be used in a different format than you took it. Like if it's going to be used in a square, if you need it to be a certain size for the web or a certain print piece, it's helpful. So we're going to go up to the crop tool, which is right here. One of the first things you want to do if you're going to crop something is you want to make sure that this checkbox up here that says delete cropped pixels is unchecked. That gives you a fallback. So if you are going to crop it and say, for example, you did something you didn't want to do, if you go back and click on it again to crop it, your pixels that were cropped will still be there. And that's good, especially to save in your working documents, so that if, for example, you cropped it to a square and later you needed the whole image again, it would be there for you. So, for example, let's say we took this photo of this bee and this flower, and we really want the bee to be the focus of the picture, and we don't want so much of the other flowers up here. What we'll do is we'll get our crop tool out, and we are going to drag it down. And if we want it to be the same dimensions, the same shape rectangle that it was when we took it, we can hold down the shift key as we drag it in. And that constrains the box and it keeps it from shifting from this exact shape. And that way you know what you're getting. So one thing that's very helpful about Photoshop's crop tool is that it gives you these thirds. And any of you who are more familiar with photography will know that the rule of thirds is something that is taught to make your picture really dynamic. If your picture has thirds, the things that are in the picture fit into those thirds, it will just visually look nice. That's how it works. So Photoshop helpfully gives you those thirds so you can figure out what you want to be in them. It's also really helpful if you put the focus of your image where they intersect. Like, for example, if this bee is right here where those lines intersect, then he's going to be in focus in this image. That's what your eye will be drawn to when you look at the picture. So that's pretty nice looking, our little bee there. If we needed it to be a different shape, Photoshop has this ratio tool. So if I clicked on this and let's say I wanted it to fit into a square, I was going to Instagram it or use it for something in a publication later, it would give me this square, and then I'd be able to take my bee and my flower and it would keep this in a square for me no matter what I do, which is helpful. And then I could just position it however I wanted. And you can finalize the cropping of your image by clicking on this crop tool again and hitting crop, but you can also do it just by hitting your enter key when you have the crop tool open. So there's that. That's a nice square image. If you are using it for something and you know exactly what size it needs to be, you could, let's say it needed to be 1200 pixels by 800 pixels. You could type that into these spots up here and it'll give you a bounding box for your crop tool that will make it those dimensions. So there's that. You have a nice 1200 by 800 pixel image, and that's also helpful to keep if you are cropping multiple images to the same size for something. It will stay up there and it will make sure that they're all going to be what you need them to be. I think that's it for the crop tool. It's pretty helpful and easy to use.
Cropping is one of the quickest and easiest ways to just bring focus to a photo and take care of any out of focus spots that you might not want to highlight in the finished image. So at this point, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to save your images and the different kinds of file types that you can save out of Photoshop. And we'll just use this beautiful bee and coneflower as our example. So if you decide that your image is beautiful and perfect just the way it is, and you want to save it so that you don't lose this beautiful image forever, you're going to go up to File in your menu, and you can choose either Save, which will open a dialog box with a bunch of different options. And it's a little bit big and overwhelming. So I'm just dragging and dropping the actual dialog box. And you can pick your format. I always recommend keeping a version of your photo as a Photoshop file. A Photoshop file can't be uploaded to the web. It can't be printed directly from in most printers. But it is very helpful to keep, like Tori showed you with keeping the actual full pixels when you crop something. You want to keep all of the information that you can from that original image in case you want to go back and edit it more later. So keep a Photoshop version of your file, and we'll just say save it as, and you can tell that it's a Photoshop file because in the file name, the extension is .psd. And you'll just click save. And it'll say, do you want to maximize the compatibility? And you'll say, okay, fine. That just means that it'll open in the most possible different versions of Photoshop. So in case you needed to send it to someone who was going to open it on a different computer, and they might not have the same version of Photoshop, they should still be able to open it.
Or if you updated your Photoshop later, it would still open for you after the fact.
Yes. You want it maximized compatibility always. One thing that you do need to keep in mind when you're saving a photo is, what are you saving it for? Are you saving it to print it, or are you saving it to go on the web? If you're saving it to print, you need to select a specific color ID for it. And you can look at this by viewing the image mode. And this image is currently in RGB color mode. That means that the color is optimized for the web. It's not optimized for print. So if you sent this photo to print, most likely the printer would account for that different color mode and it wouldn't make a huge difference. But sometimes the colors can be slightly off. And when you print it, you would see that it wasn't exactly what it looked like in your computer screen. That's because the color mode didn't match what you were sending it to do. So you want to make sure that the color mode matches whatever your final destination is for that photo. So if we were sending this photo to print, we would want to make sure that our image mode is CMYK color. CMYK is the color mode that printers use. And you'll see it'll pop up this little dialog box and it'll say, you're going to convert this. And you just say, yes, okay, I am. And you'll see it changes the color slightly so that when a printer reads this, it will read those colors more exactly. If you're saving this photo and it's going to go on the web, you want to make sure that your image mode is RGB color mode, because that's what computer screens read the colors in. So that's just a quick side note, but it can make a difference if you're going to print your image or if you're going to show your image on the web. Those can make slight differences and just enough to make you go, that's not what I intended. So just make sure it's in the right mode. Saving as file types. Once you have your Photoshop file saved, you can save it again in whatever the ultimate file format is that you need. So if you're going to print this photo, you want to save it as File, Save As, and it'll open up the dialog box again. But when you click Format, you're going to want to select a JPEG image. That's going to save your image at a high resolution, but it's also going to keep it small enough that you can send it via email, etc. It doesn't save all of the information like a Photoshop file does. It's going to flatten the image if you have any layers. We'll talk about layers in just a minute. But if you have multiple layers in your Photoshop file from editing it, a JPEG will compress those layers so that it's small enough for you to share on via email or on a thumb drive or sending it to a printer. But it's going to retain enough detail that if you print it, it'll look really nice. So we'll say bee and flower print dot JPG, which lets us know it's a JPEG file, save. And it will give you an options box that shows you the estimated file size that your final file will be. You don't really need to worry about the format options, just leave them at standard. That determines how programs open the file and whether or like how much memory they retain of it. You want to leave the quality at maximum or high. And you can see when you change that, it'll show you the difference in file size. So if you know that you're going to be sending this image via email and your email server has a maximum limit and you want to make sure that your file will still go through, you can make sure that it's under the file requirements. If you want to save a photo for web, you're going to want to save it in a different file format than you would for print. So for print, we use JPEGs. For web, you'll save as and go down here to PNG. A PNG file is smaller than a JPEG file, and it retains less detail than a JPEG file, but because it's smaller and it opens faster on web browsers, it's optimized for the web. So we'll select PNG and we'll say bee and flower web.png. It's always helpful for me to label the photos with their destination, if you will, because that way when you're looking at them in your folder or wherever you've saved them, you can immediately tell that the PSD is the working file, your print is the JPEG image, and then your web image is the PNG file. And you can just leave these alone. The auto smallest compression and none interlace is fine. And it'll save, you'll see up here, Photoshop gives you an estimation of where it is in the saving process. And I think that's it for working saving files. So one of the things that I mentioned was in Photoshop, you have the ability to work with layers to edit your photo. And Tori is going to start talking about some of the basic layer adjustments that you can make to really give your image some jazz.
Yes. So we're gonna say goodbye to the bee and flower again here. And I'm gonna open this one. So when I am editing images, adjustment layers are super duper helpful for getting them to look the way that you intended them to look. Even the best photographers, I'm sure, even though I'm not one, the pictures don't always come out of the camera exactly the way that you wanted them to, which is why we have the beauty of Photoshop to help us get what we wanted. Adjustment layers are a really, really helpful way to make your photos look extra good and professional. So where we find those is over here. We have our layers box. And at the very bottom, this like half black and white circle is our adjustment layers button. So if you click on these, one of the ones that is most helpful is the brightness and contrast. So if you see this image here of these tulips is kind of dark, it looks like maybe it was taken on a cloudy day. It's not necessarily bad, but it could be a lot better. So we're going to use the brightness and contrast adjustment layer to make it look good. And when you add an adjustment layer, it's going to pop up over here right above your background. And the layers panel is really simple to use. These little eyes over here toggle whether or not you can see the layers. So if, for example, I click off here, the background goes away and it's not deleted, it's just hidden. And then we haven't done anything with this one yet, but you can do the same thing. If you want to use your adjustment layer, you can double click on that circle that's up here now. Maybe. Oh, yes. Sorry, I'm used to using a different configuration here, but it will pop up this dialog box where you can use your adjustment layer. So our image is kind of dark, so we're going to take the brightness slider and we're going to take it up. And that looks nice. Our whites are whiter, and it looks more like the sun is shining on this tulip now. And then the contrast slider is also helpful. If you take it down, you can see it gets kind of gray and muddy and not very dynamic. But if you turn it up a little, it'll make your colors and your blacks and whites and the darks and lights in the picture really pop. So some of this goes to personal preference, but as long as it looks like it's a well-lit photo and it looks the way that you wanted it to, that's pretty much when you're good as far as the brightness and contrast goes. So we're gonna leave that. And if you go back down here, you can see, you can toggle it if you wanna compare it to what you started with and turn it off. And there's our dark tulip. And there is our nice bright tulip picture. Another thing that's helpful to know about layers is that you can change how opaque they are. So for example, if I adjusted this just a little too much and it was easier for me, I wanted it to not be as bright, or whatever adjustment I made on this layer to not be as visible, I could go to this opacity slider and just take it down some. So you can see if it's there, it's all the way transparent. But if you take it up, it can make it just a little less visible on the layer below it. Another adjustment layer that is helpful is the black and white adjustment layer. This one is especially helpful, not only if you just want your photo to look extra dramatic and film noir, but if, for example, you're printing it black and white, just sending it to your printer and choosing black and white in the menu there will work, but sometimes it might not expose your picture the way that you want it, and it might not turn out in the way that you had intended. Some things might look kind of weird if you just let your printer do it. So the black and white adjustment layer can help you have more control over the process of turning your photo to black and white. So if we toggle this on, this dialog box up here will pop up. And it has all these sliders where you can choose the darkness of specific colors in your image. It also has all of these presets, which is helpful. And you can kind of go through and see which one makes your photo look the way that you want it to. Like, that is not necessarily true to what those tulips look like. So maybe something more like that, even though they look light. or if I want to work from my default, and just kind of play around with it. Every image is going to look different in the black and white tool, and you can just kind of see what works for you. So I like that with my tulips looking kind of light. So I'm going to leave it there. Another helpful thing about using the adjustment layers is that they're not destructive to your original file. So if I save this as a PSD, I have all of these layers here with all the changes I made, and all I have to do is toggle them off to see my image the way it was before. This is really helpful because it means you can do multiple things to it. So I can have a version that's color that I can save from, that's nice and exposed, and then I can also have my black and white layer here, and it doesn't permanently affect whether or not my photo is black and white. One of the other adjustment layers, and I know there are a lot in here, I don't use them all the time. The other one that's extremely helpful to me is the color balance adjustment layer. And it's not something we necessarily need for this photo in particular, but I use it a lot if I take photos inside. Fluorescent lighting can make your photos look really yellow and give them a really unhealthy looking tint, especially if it's of people. So the color balance adjustment layer really helps you fine tune the colors that are appearing in your photo. So for example, it gives you this box up here. If our tulip photo was taken inside, or even if I just wanted it to look like it was maybe more sunny out the day that I took this, I could move these sliders around. They affect, as you can see, this one makes it more cyan or more red. It's kind of sunsetty. That helps the green stand out some, and maybe a little more yellow for some sunlight. And that's affecting the midtones of the photos. It also helps you change the shadows or the highlights. If my photo was taken inside and really bad fluorescent lighting, what I normally do is I go to the midtones and I make them just 1 or 2 plus a little bit blue, and then I do the same thing and I make the highlights a little bluer too. So you can see here, it makes it look really cool because it was taken outside, but if it was taken inside, it would be helpful in getting rid of the yellow cast. And that is really it for the adjustment layers. So we can see, if you go through, you can see all the changes that you've done. So there's our brightness, there's our color balance, and then also our black and white layer that we can use if we want to. So yeah.
All right. The last thing that we're going to talk about is adding text to your photo. This is helpful, especially if you maybe need to upload a photo for the web and you need a photo credit to credit the person who took the photo. You don't want it to get lost if someone downloads it from the web. You want it to be actually on the photo. Or if there's an important caption that needs to go to the photo that you don't want to get lost. And we use the non-destructive layers to add text, just like we did to edit the photo. So for adding text, you will simply add a new layer in your layers, and instead of choosing an adjustment layer like you did to edit the actual photo, you'll just add a new layer down here. If you see, it looks like a little paper note, and when you put your mouse over it, it'll say create a new layer. You click that, you'll see it appear at the top of your image. Then you can come over here to your text tool, select it. You'll see it's this large T, and it's called the horizontal type tool. It'll give you, your mouse will turn into a little cursor, and you can draw out a box to put your text in. If you need, sometimes windows in your Photoshop may not be obviously open. We can see some properties right here in the right-hand side, but maybe this isn't the controls that I want. Maybe I want more options for my text. So I'm going to come up here to Window, and I'm going to pull out Character. Character refers to the actual text characters, and it'll pop you up a window that has all of the different font options, the size options. It'll give you options for your color if you want to change the color of your text. So I can see from my cursor that my text is really huge, and that's confirmed when I look over here at my font size and it's at 120 points. That's ridiculous. I don't need it to be that big. I need it to be about, let's say, 12 points, and you'll see my little cursor became much smaller. And I'll type out, let's see, photo by, you took this, right? Yeah, Tori took this photo. So we'll say Tori Salvador. But maybe this text isn't what I had in mind. It's not the right font. So I can come over here to Character with my text selected, and I can go through all of the fonts in my font library. And maybe I just want something really simple. Let's do one of the Gotham fonts, Gotham Book. And I'm looking at it, and I don't want it in all caps. So I'll select it, and if you need even more options for your text, you can click this little multiple line button in the character and paragraph styles, and it'll open more options. Sorry. And I can see that I have all caps selected. So at some time in the past, I must have decided I really needed enthusiastic letters, but I don't need them to be that enthusiastic today. So I'm going to deselect it, and you'll see that here it's changed it to be lowercase. So to move my tool, I come up here and I just click my basic move tool. That will give me back my real cursor. And then I can move that text just by dragging it anywhere I want. I suggest if you have a photo credit that you want on your photo, keep it in one of the corners. A lower corner is better. Just visually speaking, you don't want to take away from the importance of the photo and what's in focus there, but we want it to be visible, just not intrusive. If I wanted to change the color of this, I could select the text, come up to the character style and click the color, and it'll open up this color picker. If I know a specific hex code for the color that I want, I could type it in there. If I know a specific RGB combination, I could type it in here, but I'm just going to use the color picker and search for a nice, not quite black, but almost black gray. Let's see what that looks like. Now I can tell it's a little bit dark, and I'm losing it in the darkness of the photo. So to continue editing that, I just click either the type tool again and click into that type box, or a shortcut would be just to click T on your keyboard, and that brings you the type tool, and you can select it. Come up to color, maybe a little bit lighter gray. And now it's legible. We want it to meet all of our accessibility standards. It needs to be legible, but it's not intrusive, and it doesn't take your focus away from the beautiful tulips. So as you can see, that layer is a layer just like any of our adjustment layers, which means that you can toggle it to be there or not be there without actually deleting it. So if you want to print the picture without the credit, you can just turn off make sure that it's not visible, and then save it and print it. Or if you decide later that you really do need it, you can come back and turn it back on and save it again and print it from there, and it'll have it. So it's really useful in that you can save those layers in your Photoshop file and come back to them at any later time and continue to edit, continue to play around with it. One thing that I will say is useful is in layers, you have the capability to duplicate your layers. So say, for instance, that you really want to make sure that you keep one of your original versions of the picture in your Photoshop file. You don't want it to get accidentally edited in any way. So we could unlock this file by double-clicking on the background. That's the original image. And it'll say, do you want to name it? And you'll say, okay, and it will make it a layer. You can simply right-click on that layer and say duplicate. It'll say, do you want to duplicate it? And say, yes, I do. And it'll give you that as a copy. That way, you can keep a copy of the original and you can just turn it off, but it'll always be there so that if you ever mess up this original one, say somehow I got in here and I decided that I was going to invert my image, which is horrifying and just scary all over. And somehow maybe I decided that I wanted to merge those layers so that it's all one thing. I can't undo that. It's a destructive way of editing. I could still go back to this copy of the original layer that I have turned off, and I could turn that back on and it would be like nothing ever happened. I could have it saved. So when I'm editing, I always try to keep a copy of that original layer, and you can title it. If you click on that layer title, you can type in whatever title you want. So I'll put original do not touch in that, just so that I know this is the layer that's my saving grace. If something goes horribly wrong, I can always go back to this layer, and I don't even have to look at this layer. I can just right click and say delete. It'll say, do you want to? And I'll say yes, and we'll be back where we started at the original do not touch layer. So that gives you an overview of just the most basic ways that you can use Photoshop to enhance your images, whether it's cropping out an ugly part of an image, or just something that's out of focus in your image, or brightening an image, or making an image that was taken in fluorescent light look like it was taken outside.
Or how to save your image for the web or print or anything that you need.
Yeah. So those are just some basic Photoshop 101 tools that we use every day. And if anyone has questions, if we went too fast and anyone wants to go over something again, we're happy to do that. Now is the time for your questions. So feel free to unmute and ask. Or
And like Doug said, this is going to be recorded and put up later for you to go back to. And also, we are willing to compile some online resources and send them out to y'all. Just some stuff that's been helpful to us. So if that's something that would be helpful, we can do that also.
If you're interested in maybe some more in-depth tutorials on the other tools in the basic Photoshop toolbars that you've seen over here that we haven't even touched, because honestly, it takes more time than we can spend today or that you have today. But if you're interested in those, we have resources that we can share, tutorials that we use, and we'll be happy to send those out if you'll just send us an email and let us know that you want those. And yes, thank you, David. We will be happy to send those resources.
Yeah.
Sophie and Tori, there was a couple questions about people downloading Photoshop. One question was about having to pay for it. Some other people were having issues of how to get logged in. Do you have any suggestions on that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just saw those in the chat. I had it minimized and didn't realize. I spoke to John Morgan in OIT on main campus, and his suggestion was if you're having issues, go ahead and call OIT. And I'm sorry if you may have already done that and that's the problem. But my understanding from him was that OIT is willing to work with everybody to get those downloaded, and they should not be an issue. Photoshop, the way that our licensing for the University of Tennessee works has changed just in the last year. And so even our office had to re-download all of the Creative Cloud, the Creative Suite, and it is a hassle. I'm not going to lie. It's complicated and it is somewhat of a hassle. So if you have not talked to OIT, I would strongly encourage calling OIT and just maybe even letting them walk you through it. I know I had to call John and have him take over my computer for a little bit just to make sure that I was doing it right, because it's not intuitive and it can be very confusing about logins or even special permissions and test versions.
And especially with our UT's license for it having changed, it added some layers of complexity. And OIT knows them better than even we do, and they're usually really great and helpful with any questions like that.
Yeah. So that would be my number one suggestion is call OIT and just let them know what issues you've been having, and they should be able to work through it.
Yeah, and also I wanted to add to let them know that you're with UTIA instead of UTK, because I think there may be some difference in the agreements as well between main campus and us. So that you might want to make sure of that as well.
Well, does anybody have specific questions? Anything that maybe we were just going on autopilot and didn't focus on for long enough? Or if you're working in Photoshop, if there's been something that's been giving you trouble, we're happy to take those questions too. Thank you, Lori.
Yeah, thanks.
Sample images. I would strongly recommend you go to the DAD, the database. I don't remember what it stands for, but it's
Digital Asset Database.
Digital Asset Database. It has all of the images that you could ever want or need, and they're all sourced. You don't have to worry about licensing, so you can download those and play with them to your heart's content. And they're agriculturally centered, so you might even find some that you can actually use. Yeah,
they're photos that are taken by other agents and specialists, and like I said, everything is no licensing, not to worry about anything there. It's a great resource, and if you want to contribute your photos as well, please do. There are a little over 200 photos up there, and there are some very, very, very good photographers out there.
I was looking through that yesterday actually for examples, and I couldn't find anything that we could use for examples. So that's really good because we were looking for, photos that we could do editing on, and everything looked good, so we couldn't use them.
Yeah, send us some 4-H photos. They really need 4-H photos. So if you got any, send them up. Well, if they're...
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm from Tennessee State University, and of course we collaborate. Would we have access to that digital database?
I would have to double check on that. I know it's a UT extension database.
Right.
So let me check on that. I know that was part of the UT extension marketing toolkit.
Okay.
It was a part of that. So I'm not sure if TSU has access to it. I'll have to double check on that. Could you send an email at dedlund@tennessee.edu and I can follow up with you?
That's EKLUND?
EDLUND.
EDLUND.
Yeah, at tennessee.edu, and I'll do what I can to follow up on that.
Sure, thanks.
Okay.
Doug is definitely our expert on the database.
It was a long time coming. We beta tested the devil out of that thing. Are there any other questions? We got plenty of time. Going once, going twice.
And if I know I always come up with questions after something is finished. So if you come up with something afterwards that you're like, man, why didn't I think of that? Feel free to email me or Tori. We're happy to email or call, whichever is easiest for you. My email is swillbor@tennessee.edu. I'll put it in the chat.
You should put mine also. And mine is tsalvador@tennessee.edu. And yeah, like Sophie said, you can contact either one or both of us with any questions that you have. I always think of questions after the fact too.
Well, and I'll add mine as well.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. We enjoyed it. We hope it
thanks.
was helpful for you. And like we said, contact us if you have any other questions. Doug's going to make this available after we stop sharing. So
We hope it was helpful to y'all.
yeah.
And one quick thing before we sign off, this is kind of something we wanted to do from our office to supply some training to both our UTI communicators group and to extension agents and ag research and all of the units as well. So if you have ideas of things you'd like to see, like regarding Photoshop, do you want a more advanced Photoshop training? Do you want training? There's some Adobe apps out there that are really cool that are free to download to iOS devices that we could do some training on that. Do you want photography training? Do you want video training? Video editing, basics on video editing, social media, things like that. Think of what you might like to see, and we're going to try to put together a training like this maybe once a quarter, so you're not getting bombarded with trainings every week. So just let us know what you want. Send them to any one of us, to myself or Sophie or Tori, or send them to Brandy Brevin, and we can know that way as well. So we'd like to do more of this for you to help you go out in the field to, improve your skills as well. So let us know. Alrighty then, I guess we're at that awkward silence stage of every webinar. So if there are no further questions, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And thank you all for joining us today. And thanks to Sophie and Tori for taking a little bit of time out of their day, because they're pretty slammed, and I appreciate them doing this. So taking time out of their day to provide this training. So looking forward to seeing you at the next one. Have a great day. Bye.
Have a great day.
Bye.